A new Death Note game in 2024. Wow, I'm so excited to...
Looks cheeks. Give us a full-fledged DN game.
So it's literally Among Us, but Death Note edition?
Oh, hell no. What a waste of the IP. Ooh.
This, of all things, is what inspired me to start uploading here again, huh? Okay, so, Death Note Killer Within was announced this week, almost shadow dropping its release date of November 5th, 2024, next week as of time of recording, after only what I can gather is minimal indication it was even in development prior. I certainly was not aware it was a thing before I saw the YouTube video trailer in my recommended feed, and I'm making a whole video about Death Note, so you know I'm probably a nerd about these things. Death Note Killer Within is a game within the world of Death Note, enacting a sort of hypothetical scenario to catch Kira. A game within the game, I guess you could say, of Light and L creating their own little game to try and work out how they might catch Kira, even though Light is Kira. It is an online 10-player multiplayer game, and in each game, one player takes control of Kira, another L, and the rest of the players either Kira's minions. The information we've got so far is a little bit sparse. I think there will be multiple Kira minions potentially, but there'll be at least one, like Misa in the anime. There were also others that worked with Light, and the rest of the players will take on the investigators. Each role has its own set of abilities, kind of like what was mods in Among Us and eventually added into the actual game. In the action phase, everyone completes their tasks, and then the meeting phase where people can accuse and discuss. And yes, this is the first sign of that Among Us inspiration. However, there are plenty of ways this differs from Among Us and provides a uniquely Death Note spin. First of all, if Kira manages to kill L, apparently that's game right there, which yeah, is very accurate. I mean, until it wasn't. You can kill L once, Light, but what if another L came along? Didn't think about that, did you, idiot? Another thing I really like is that each player has an ID that reveals their name, which you have to stand near them to obtain and then write in the Death Note, but that can make you seem more sus the more you do it. In addition, it also looks like there are a set of different ways to kill, like how the default was a heart attack in Death Note, but if Light added realistic specifics, the person would die as written. And I think that's a really fun way of changing up the Among Us kills while being true to the anime. Kira's follower will be able to help Kira by stealing IDs and talking to Kira privately, as well as being able to transfer the Death Note from Kira to Kira's follower. Another huge thing from the anime, like in instances where we had characters like Mikami and Misa taking on the Death Note, and in parts of the anime, Light even forgetting he was Kira. This adds a really useful gameplay component, and a switch up to what could be seen as Among Us's formula. Imagine even if an imposter killed in Among Us, they could give the imposter role to a friend, meaning they no longer counted as an imposter. Pretty neat. The investigators and L then function to catch Kira, while L has his own special abilities like commanding investigators, and this is vague on the PlayStation blog, but apparently L can also, and I quote, facilitate discussion in the meeting phase to narrow down suspicious players. I don't know if that literally is just this big j'accuse pop-up we see in this image, but it probably is, maybe. L as a role may prove less useful if you're playing in lobbies full of friends over voice chat in that instance, but I'm sure they've at least considered that. It also appears that being initially voted as Kira is not necessarily the end, like it would be if you were an imposter who got voted out in Among Us, and there is more gameplay that will play out before the ultimate Kira accusation is made. And this is great from the off. It is a PC and PS4/5 game, but there will be crossplay, and at launch on November 5th, the game will be free for PS Plus Essential subscribers. There are definitely elements here that resemble Among Us, I think the voting segment especially. And in official Bandai Namco press releases, this is also where you can best see that, yeah, this game is going to have cosmetics, which admittedly is the whole part, in my opinion, that makes it look like they ripped off Among Us. Those cosmetic player characters on that voting screen, I can see why the social media reaction jumped to this is an Among Us ripoff. Now, not everybody was saying Among Us in a negative way. A lot of people were saying like, oh my god, Death Note Among Us, this looks so cool. Some people even saying that it made the most sense for a Death Note game to be similar or inspired by Among Us. Some people also said that they wanted it to be a visual novel, which, you know, I like visual novels, I like Digimon Survive, but I don't think a Death Note visual novel is going to do very well outside of Japan in 2024. And some people were even asking for like Detroit Become Human or Persona Death Note games. How much money do you think Bandai Namco can put into a Death Note game in 2024? Come on, everybody. There's also people saying it's not accurate to Death Note, which I think is just absolutely crazy because Death Note is Social Deduction, the anime, and there's been people that are riffing and making fun of these little player characters, but did you watch Death Note? I'm going to say either yes or it's been so long that you've forgotten, but those are straight from the anime. They are the figures that Nia uses when he acts out his own little Kira games, his own little Killer Within ideas. In fact, that little hamburglar that everyone's making fun of is literally the exact figure that Nia uses to represent Kira. It's one-for-one anime accurate. Admittedly, Nia used those figures, not L. Ryazaki, but whatever. So yes, this game is obviously inspired by the success of Among Among Us, but Among Us is not the originator of this concept. And in fact, Death Note has a social deduction video game that predates Among Us by 11 years. Yes, that was Death Note's Kira game for the Nintendo DS, and now I'll forgive you for not knowing if this existed. If you want to see some of the gameplay, I actually played it over on our gaming channel, Extra Juicy. It was never translated and never left Japan officially, but there is now a fan translation. The main chunk of the game was a story mode, which yes is not similar to Among Us or indeed Death Note Killer Within, but all the major gameplay of Kira game was a social deduction game, with you assuming the role of L or Kira and then trying to work out who in this party of characters from the anime was Kira. And indeed Kira could kill off L, much like in Killer Within, and once again it would be game if they killed L. No matter if you played the story mode, solo against CPUs, or yes, the two-player multiplayer, Death Note Kira game was a social deduction game a decade before Among Us in the Death Note franchise. It was, to Japanese Death Note fans, what a Death Note video game was. Now admittedly that multiplayer did have a much more limited lobby size. It was only a two-player multiplayer. One person as L, one person as Kira. But it came out on the goddamn DS and was a social deduction game. And again, yes, there are elements of Killer Within that are inspired by Among Us, obviously. But Among Us in turn is inspired by other games. There's Town of Salem, which came out in 2014, 4 years before Among Us, which in turn was inspired by Mafia or Werewolf, real-life social deduction games that date back to the 80s. And yes, Among Us is undoubtedly the most famous now. It's the one that your average person is going to know of and is going to relate all other games in this genre to, but it's not the original, nor is it the perfect version, as the countless mods to add replayability to the game will attest. Hell, even the devs don't think they somehow invented the genre, as Forrest Willard, one of the developers of Among Us, said at comicbook.com. Among Us was Marcus's idea, based on a combination of a Mafia-like game he played as a kid and the movie The Thing. Among Us has never pretended to be the only game that can be Among Us, and this is how genres work. One version of a game or a concept is made, an innovator comes along and changes things up, and then another, and then another. I do worry that people who think this looks bad or a rip-off are, God, am I about to say casuals? No, probably not. But I do think it's a lot of people who either only know Death Note from the Peter Griffin AI TikToks, or people who watched just the anime once in high school. Unlike me, the cool Chad who watched all of Death Note sub, the live-action movie sub, read the BBLA murder cases, and yes, played the fan-translated version of Death Note Kira game when it finally got made 15 years after the original game came out. I sure owned you losers. Now, I also understand Among Us is just the name people use to refer to these kind of games now. It's not all meant to be reductive, and Among Us' success means the world gets to see more of these kinds of games, and the elements that Bandai Namco have taken liberally from Among Us obviously creates that ooh, a rip-off feel. But I do genuinely worry that So It's Among Us is being used to dismiss any attempt to expand the genre in the same way Pokemon fans tend to treat any game where you tame a monster as a Pokemon rip-off. No, my day job is not making Digimon videos, why do you ask? Bandai Namco is a big company, they don't need me to meat ride them. In full transparency, I've been given game codes and promotional stuff from Bandai Namco before, but I'm not here to defend Bandai Namco, I'm here to white knight specifically for Death Note, because I love that so much, god damn it. And if this game flops, I don't care. I mean, it'd suck as a Death Note fan, but I don't really care whether this game does well and whether people actually really like it or not. I personally am going to play it with my friends because I like this kind of game and I love Death Note, but I am kind of concerned about this dogpiling on any social deduction game. As a fan specifically of lying to and sometimes murdering my friends in a socially acceptable format, it causes me concern not for this game, but for how the same kind of reaction might be to the next indie or small developer who tosses their hat into the social deduction ring and genuinely tries to make something that evolves the format. So I'm going to make this video first of all just to say you're kind of wrong about Death Note Killer Within. If anything, Death Note had this turf before Among Us, so it's in its rights in many ways to take some elements from Among Us when it makes a return, but also just to maybe we gotta change how we think about things. I think something that is genuinely toxic in the gaming community is people saying anything is like X, and sometimes something is like X. Tunic is like Zelda, that is a fair criticism. But I genuinely think if Tekken didn't exist and it came out now, someone would probably call it a Street Fighter ripoff. Can you imagine? Anyway, that's my thoughts on Death Note The Killer Within. I'm gonna check it out. Let me know if you're excited for it in the comments down below, especially if you are a Death Note fan, or maybe if you're not and you're excited for it. I have a Patreon, you can give me money so I don't have to get a real job. I appreciate you. Please subscribe and like the vid. Thanks!
You haven't seen Death Note? Oh.